welcome to Your Health Matters. I'm your host, Dr. Peter Hogenkamp, and today we're going to be discussing a subject that's near and dear to all of our hearts, and that is achieving and maintaining a healthy weight. As a primary care physician, I spend a tremendous amount of time discussing this very subject. And when I do, I always like to frame it with a story about a patient of mine. This particular gentleman has long suffered from a weight problem, and he also has a diabetes problem and a heart problem that are directly a consequence of his weight. So you can imagine that I've been trying to get him to lose weight for many years unsuccessfully. So one day he walks into the office for his appointment, and he's lost 50 pounds. Of course, I get up, give him a fist pump, and congratulate him on his weight loss, tell him how good he looks, and he proceeds to tell me how good he feels. And I have to ask him, how did you lose all this weight? What motivated you to lose all this weight finally? And he said, oh, it has nothing to do with my sugar control or my heart problem. My daughter just got married, and I wanted to look good walking her down the aisle. I think this story is very telling, and what it tells me is that people are motivated to lose weight because they want to look better and they want to feel better. And those are great reasons to lose weight. But there are health outcomes as well. And as a physician, I just wanted to remind you of a couple of those. The reasons to lose weight, as you can see here in this slide, I mentioned people want to look better and they want to feel better. They also want to live longer. There is a linear relationship between weight and longevity. What does that mean? It means that if you are thinner, you are going to live longer. As far as other improvements in health outcomes, these are the ones I like to focus on as a physician. There are many, many. This particular slide here, you can see that weight loss causes your blood sugar to be lower. It causes your cholesterol to go down. It lowers your blood pressure. I think most people would realize that. They also are probably aware that weight loss results in fewer adverse cardiac outcomes, such as heart attacks, stent placements, and bypass procedures. But there are some other health outcomes that you might not be readily aware of. For instance, weight loss slows the progression of arthritis. If you are interested in not having a knee replacement or a joint replacement, such as a hip, the best thing for you to do is to lose weight. You're far more likely to end up with a knee or joint replacement if you're carrying too much weight. Another thing I like to talk about is sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a condition where people stop breathing when they sleep, and it's in addition to the fact that people aren't rested, they tend to snore with this issue as well. The other issue is that because they're not oxygenating at night, it can cause heart problems and all kinds of issues like that. To improve sleep apnea, weight loss is a great way to do that. As you lose weight, you'll have less and less sleep apnea. You'll actually feel more rested in the morning, and you'll have fewer adverse health outcomes as well. Back pain. If you go to a back doctor or a primary care doctor or orthopedic surgeon and you've got back pain, they are all going to tell you that losing weight is the first thing that you should do. Losing weight helps decrease your back pain significantly. Losing weight has positive outcomes on heart health. There's two other things I wanted to mention too, and that is mood. If you take a look at mood disorders, they are all basically have a linear relationship with your weight. In other words, the heavier you are, the less likely you are to be in a good mood. The incidence of depression increases with your weight. So if you're having trouble with mood disorder or depression, a great thing to do is to lose weight. The last thing I wanted to talk about was just good old quality of life. Quality of life is kind of a quasi-health metric, but as a family doctor, I like to talk about it all the time. Because if my patient has good quality of life, I feel like they're in a good place in the world. So, quality of life. If you're trying to improve your quality of life, the best thing that you can do is to lose weight. Not only is quality of life generally higher in people who are thinner, but if you are heavy, there is a significant increase in the quality of life when you lose weight. And we're going to talk about that more when we talk about bariatric surgery in a little while. So, how do you lose weight? I'd like to put up this cartoon. It's one of my favorites. In case you can't read it, these two guys are running. It says, "It's time to get serious about losing weight. Today I filed a restraining order against the pizza guy." This is a great little cartoon because it does, it's kind of foreshadowing what we're going to talk about in a little while, and that's the low carbohydrate diet, which is the only diet that I recommend, just so that you know. But the 5 general ways that we lose weight are diet, exercise, nutritional supplements, medications, and weight loss or bariatric surgery. Just as a spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you right now that diet and exercise are by far the 2 methods that we use most. I rarely use nutritional supplements and I don't use medications at all, although I do use bariatric surgery some as well. But again, we're going to focus today on diet and exercise. The reason I mention that is because I think patients are always trying to look for some type of magic pill, some type of easy way to lose weight. And I'm here to tell you that there isn't an easy way to lose weight. They're all difficult, but they're all worth it. As I was just discussing in the reasons to lose weight, there's so many reasons to lose weight. And I keep on focusing on those reasons with my patients because it is a struggle to lose weight. I think most of us know that, but again, well worth it. So, dropping down to this next slide here, this has some general, general issues about diet. And I always start off by saying all successful diets have one cardinal feature. And that cardinal feature is that the number of calories that you take in or consume has to be less than the number of calories that you burn. There is no other way to lose weight. It's a simple mathematical formula. Just so that we have a frame of reference, the average adult burns about 2,000 calories a day. So, if you're trying to lose weight as an average adult, then you need to consume less than 2,000 calories a day. I point this out to patients, and I use the term that every single person, as a consequence of federal law, is actually now a dietitian. And that's because, by federal law, if anything that's sold that's a food product has to have that little nutritional data on it. And you should be looking at that. You should be your own dietitian or nutritionist. It's amazing to me how often I'll mention something to a patient and they'll say, have no idea how many calories are in something, how much fat, how much carbohydrate. You should look at it. I think the low carbohydrate kind of revolution has taught people to be looking at carbs, and that's helped a lot. But again, you should be looking at that particular data. It's very important. The next general piece of information I like to give people on diets is that I want you to avoid all gimmick and fad diets. There are so many of them that I won't mention, but there are no miracles out there. It's all hard work. It's all about reducing calories and increasing the number of calories you burn. The last thing I want to mention in general about any diet is that rapid weight loss is to be avoided at all costs. Now, why is that? Well, the reason I mention this to people is because people love to lose weight rapidly. Oftentimes people don't start losing weight until maybe a month or two before something they want to go to, like a reunion, or as I mentioned, with a wedding. And they give themselves a month to lose 20 pounds. And so oftentimes they're successful. But what happens when they go into this rapid weight loss mode is that all of a sudden the body recognizes it and the body doesn't like it. Now, we have 2 brains. We have the higher brain and we have a lower brain, which is called the brainstem. The brainstem that we have is the same brainstem that human beings had 300,000 years ago when we first evolved. And at that period of time, starvation was one of the main ways that people died. People starved to death. So the brainstem evolved trying to prevent starvation. What does that mean? That means if it senses that you're losing weight rapidly, it actually goes into starvation status. And that is, it becomes more efficient with the calories that we're putting into our body. The body is, we actually only process about half of the calories that we eat. It's about 50%. When you go into starvation status, we start utilizing more and more of those calories so that none are wasted. What that means is if you are on a rapid weight loss program and you start losing weight, when you go off that diet, not only are you getting additional calories because you've gone off the diet, but your body is now more efficient. And this is the story that people tell me about all the time. I lost weight, then I put it right back on, and I ended up being heavier than I was to start with. And that's why, because of the brainstem, which has evolved from 300,000 years ago. So, weight loss is to be slow and methodical. Now, it's not sexy to lose weight slowly and methodically, but it's important because if you lose weight rapidly, you're going to put it back on. If there's one thing that you remember from our discussion today, I'd like you to remember that. So, we're going to talk now about types of diet. Again, I mentioned that the only diet that I recommend is the low carbohydrate diet, but I did want to talk about a few of these other issues as well. The low fat diet. Low fat diets started approximately in the 1990s, and since that period of time, when low fat diets became into prominence, the average American has gained over 10 pounds. So that piece of data right there tells me that low fat diets don't work. If you take a look at the individual studies, there are some studies that show minimal success with these. There are some studies that show no success at all. Low fat diets don't work, in my opinion, and I'm going to tell you why. Fat is a satiator. What does that mean? That means that fat actually stimulates the satiety center in your brain and tells you to stop eating. Protein does the same thing to a lesser extent. So if you're not eating fat, your brain isn't telling you to stop eating. The only way you stop eating then is by the time your stomach gets so distended with food that you simply have no room. At that point in time, you've eaten way too much. So in general, the low-fat diets are ineffective and I don't recommend them. The Mediterranean diet is another diet that's come into favor over the last 10 years. Basically, this is a diet that's high in olive oil, high in avocados and good fats, which I think is excellent. It's low beef, which I'm not so wild about. There's not really a lot of data to suggest that Mediterranean diet works. It all comes from the fact that people in the Mediterranean have lower heart disease, and therefore, it must be that their diet is causing it. When you actually transport the Mediterranean diet into non-Mediterranean folks, you don't see that much benefit from it. Intermittent fasting is another way to lose weight. That's come about into popularity recently. Basically, the idea of intermittent fasting comes from the fact that as we have evolved from primordial man, into this, 3 meals a day kind of thing, we hearken back to, years ago when primordial man ate when they killed something or they gathered something. They didn't eat all the time, and so they fasted on an intermittent basis simply because they had no food. Intermittent fasting hasn't been around that long, but there is some preliminary data to indicate that intermittent fasting is actually going to be an effective way to lose weight. Again, it makes sense to me from a paleontological standpoint. This is what our ancestors did, and those folks did not have the obesity problem that we had. Vegetarian diets are another way to lose weight. It's interesting because I don't recommend them in general, because if you, I love vegetables. I recommend vegetables to people all the time. And if you were going to eat just vegetables, then I think it's a great diet. However, it's difficult to be filled up by just vegetables. And what oftentimes happens to people who are on vegetarian diets is they eat way too much starch. Starch is a complex carbohydrate, and in my opinion, it's akin to a poison to your body. We're going to talk about that more in a couple minutes. The last thing I've got down here is the very low calorie diet. Very low calorie diets consist of a diet of about 800 calories per day. Oftentimes, these are administered, through a protein shake or something like that. So people actually don't eat at all. They just have the shake, which gives them their sustenance for the day. Very low-calorie diets have to be monitored by a physician because they can cause some associated health problems that need to be watched. So, moving on to the next, to the bulk of this presentation, and that is about low-carbohydrate diets. Just wanted to give you a quick idea about carbohydrates. If you take a look at the chemical symbol of carbohydrates, it looks a lot like the chemical symbol of hydrocarbons, which are gasoline. I mention this to people all the time because I also think this is a very telling similarity. What I mean is, a hydrocarbon, like octane or propane, are fuels for your engines, and carbohydrates are fuels for your body. So, body fuel sounds like a great thing. The truth of the matter is, it can be a good thing if you're running a marathon or a triathlon, but most of us in our sedate society that we live in simply don't need all the energy that we're putting into our body. So again, simple carbohydrates are sugars, complex carbohydrates are starches. The difference between a simple and complex carbohydrate is simply one bond, and that bond gets broken in the body. So I think we're all pretty familiar with the idea that all starches simply become sugars in your body. So we're basically talking about the same thing, and that is molecules of glucose. Why do low carbohydrates work? Low carbohydrate diets work? Well, simply reducing carbohydrates is the best way to reduce calories because we get most of our calories from carbohydrates. Now, primordial man didn't do this, and I think that was the secret to primordial man and woman's success at staying lean. There's a couple other reasons that low carbohydrate diets are recommended. They're low in processed foods, they're low in sugars, and they're low in additives. When people ask me what I mean by a low carbohydrate diet, I'm like, it's real food. If it walks, swims, flies, or grows, you can eat it. There are 4 exceptions to that rule, and that is, obviously, we don't want to eat other people. White potatoes are excluded, as are cereals, grains, and rice, because those are simply carbohydrates. Otherwise, if it walks, swims, flies, or grows, it's put on this earth for you to eat. It's good food. It's a generally high protein diet, and it helps you lose and maintain weight and maintain weight loss. So I really do like to talk about the paleontological roots of this diet, and that is, if you take a look at humanoids, for instance, Homo sapiens, we've been on this planet for 300,000 years, and during that time we ate protein as the primary source of our sustenance. Now, how do I know this? Well, number one is, if you take a look at the body, you can see that the body is made to digest protein. If you start with your teeth, we have canine teeth. Those canine teeth are meant for cutting and chewing meat. If you take a look at our gastrointestinal system, particularly our stomach is designed to digest meat. If you take a look at the stomach of animals that were not designed to eat meat, for instance, some grazers and things like that, they have a completely different gastroenterological system, which is designed to digest plants. Ours isn't. Ours is meant to digest meat, protein sources such as meat. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is our brains. If you take a look at our brains, they are very similar to other predatory brains. And that is, our brains have evolved to help us capture protein sources. So, one little tidbit I like to give people about the white potatoes. We talk about this all the time in my practice because I think white potatoes are basically poison. What they are is pure carbohydrate, pure energy. And if you're in a famine, that's wonderful. But in our society where there's calories all around us, we're literally surrounded by calories, we don't need the extra calories. Adult onset diabetes started on this planet at the same point in history that the potato was cultivated. And if you take a look at the spread of the cultivation of potatoes, you'll see that it's a linear relationship with the increase in diabetes in the world. That, to me, is great evidence that you really want to stay away from potatoes. Not that I don't like them, and not that you can't have them once in a while. So before we get on to exercise, I wanted to say a couple more words about diet, and that is, the word diet should be changed with lifestyle. I don't want you to do these things for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I want you to do these things for the rest of your life. And in order to help you to do that, the best way is to allow you to cheat once in a while. I myself favor the low carbohydrate or paleo diet. And I tell people I'm on a modified paleo diet. My wife will get a kick out of this when she listens. Hopefully she's going to listen. But I modify it. Every once in a while, I allow myself to have some starch. And the whole idea is that, or some sugars. I'm trying to stay on the program over the long term. I'm trying to get the majority of my calories from the paleo diet. And every once in a while I'll cheat so that I stay on the program for the long term. I'm a big sucker for rhubarb pie. And when my rhubarb is ripe, I love to make a rhubarb pie, and it doesn't fit onto the diet that I've been talking to you about. But a piece of rhubarb pie here, a piece of pizza there. In general, get the bulk of your calories from a high protein, low starch diet, and you're going to ultimately get down to the weight you want to. You have to keep on it over time. Again, we talked about the speed with which you should lose weight. If you lose weight slowly, the weight will stay off. If you lose weight fast, not only is it going to come back, but you're going to put more on afterwards. So keep those things in mind. Again, it's a lifestyle change. It's not it's not 2 or 3 months here. It's doing these things over the long term. So exercise. I hope to talk about exercise in an upcoming program. And I did want to mention that if you have any suggestions for me in terms of programs that we like to talk about on Your Health Matters, please let me know. The best way to do that is to email me on my website, which is peter@peterhogenkamp.com, and let me know of a subject you're interested in learning more about. I happen to be a huge exercise advocate, as many of my patients will tell you, and I could sit here and talk about the benefits of exercise for a long time. I'm not going to do that because we're going to save that for another show. However, the depression index here is pretty high in exercise because mild to moderate exercise rarely results in weight loss on its own. And I'm going to repeat that because it's worth repeating. Mild to moderate exercise rarely results in weight loss in and of itself. And that's because exercise stimulates your appetite. When you exercise, you eat more. And what happens is, and this has been shown in studies, that the more you exercise, the more you eat. People tend to replace the calories they've burned and end up with a net sum game of 0. The other thing that exercise does is it increases muscle mass. So it does result in some, a change in your weight from muscle, from fat to muscle, and it's wonderful for you. And again, please don't ever think I'm not an exercise guy. I am. I'm a huge proponent of exercise. It's just that in terms of weight loss, it's really not the way to go. The way to go is to diet and exercise at the same time. When you combine exercise with a low carbohydrate diet, that is the best way to keep weight off for the long term. I did want to mention a couple other things. This is a little cartoon here, which I like, and just to talk about exercise very briefly, in case you can't read the caption, it says, "The doctor says he needs more activity, so I hide the remote for 3 times a week." I use that to illustrate the idea that even small amounts of exercise do help, and they tend to be additive. When I tell people to exercise, I'm generally talking about having them walk, and I want them to walk at least 30 minutes 4 to 5 times a week. In truth, as little as an hour and a half of walking a week has positive health outcomes. Everyone can walk. It doesn't require any extra equipment. It doesn't require a gym membership. You can do it 365 days a year. Even here in Vermont, I walk all year long. And it is generally the method of exercise I prefer the most. It tends not to cause too many bad health outcomes, such as orthopedic issues. But again, you don't need to run marathons in order to get positive health outcomes from exercise. So I wanted to briefly talk about a couple other things, and one is nutritional supplements. I do use some protein shakes in my practice. I will say this is generally in patients who are losing weight and need to keep it on, but protein shakes can also be used for weight loss. But you have to then substitute the protein shakes for regular meals. So in people who use protein shakes to lose weight, and it's perfectly okay by me for them to do so, it's a protein shake in the morning and a protein shake in the afternoon, no snacking, and then a regular dinner. If you do that, you'll generally lose weight, especially if you're not going to snack and if the dinner that you eat is reasonable. I've got down here listed all these other things that you can buy over the counter, like appetite suppressants that are available in pharmacies, stimulants, the quote-unquote fat burner, which I love to talk about. Acai berry is something that was out a couple of years ago as a metabolism stimulant that doesn't work. The last bullet says it all. These are all panaceas and snake oil. They simply don't work. You should be investing your energy in combining diet and exercise. There's no easy solution to this. It's a difficult problem, but it can be done. I've got a lot of patients who are very successful in losing weight. It can be done, but you have to focus on what's important, and that is diet and exercise. Ignore the acai berry, ignore the fat burner. They simply don't work. This brings up my next subject, which is weight loss medications. And it says, the doctor's telling this woman who's weighing herself on the scale and not very happy with what she sees, these aren't Weight Watchers diet pills. You've been reading them upside down. And as you can look at it now, it says that they're M&Ms. I use this to illustrate my idea that weight loss medications are ineffective. In my practice, I don't use them at all. Currently, there are 5 weight loss medications that are approved by the FDA, and I want to reiterate, I don't recommend and or prescribe any of them. One of the reasons, the primary reason for this, is that weight loss medications have a long and storied history of unintended health outcomes, unintended adverse health outcomes, I should say, morbidity and mortality, which means they cause death and pain and suffering, and lawsuits. I think a lot of us will remember Redux and Fen-Phen. These were weight loss medications that were out just prior to me starting practice about 25 years ago. And when I started my practice, I was building patients. The practice that I was working in upstate New York had used a lot of Redux and Fen-Phen to help patients lose weight. As a consequence, a lot of these patients then came back on in for physicals and evaluations once these medications have been taken off the market. And I spent a lot of times trying to ascertain if any of these people had suffered adverse health outcomes from these medications, which had not only been removed from the market, but also had led to a lot of lawsuits in terms of their use. That made me very, very hesitant as far as using weight loss medications. And as I say, I don't me personally, I don't prescribe these things or recommend them in any way. I did want to spend a few minutes on bariatric surgery, because bariatric surgery is something that we should be talking about, and we should be doing more of it. Bariatric surgery can literally be life-saving for many patients. In every case, bariatric surgery is life-altering. I've had patients tell me they don't want to do it because they didn't think it was safe. Just so that you know, in the last decade, the safety profile of bariatric surgery has greatly improved. And it's now to the point where it has no additional, bariatric surgery has no additional risk than any other surgery of a similar nature. The patients that should most significantly consider bariatric surgery are those people that have comorbidities. In other words, other problems associated with their obesity, such as diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease. If you are considering bariatric surgery, and I think if you've got any of these problems that are associated with obesity, you should get involved now. It's a process. There's a lot of things that you have to do to be eligible for weight loss surgery. It takes about 6 months to a year to be ready for it, so you should actually go ahead and get those things started right away. I wanted to show you just a little cartoon here about this type of weight loss surgery, which I don't recommend. This patient here has lost 40 pounds in 2 minutes, and you can see that her arm has been amputated. That's a bit of a light humor. However, I don't want it to detract from my point that bariatric surgery should be considered in patients who need significant weight loss. All right, that's going to be a wrap here, folks. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope you'll tune in again for our next episodes. Ciao.